The following program on PBS Fort Wayne is made possible in part by
the Steel Dynamics Foundation, supporting a wide variety of causes, including children and family services, economic development, and education in business and technology fields. The Steel Dynamics Foundation, strengthening the communities where our employees live and work.
Funding also provided through generous contributions from these businesses and foundations, and from viewers like you. Thank you.
Actually, I've never worked on a building like this.
It's amazing what they could do 108 years ago.
John was just simply a natural-born entrepreneur.
When you're in someone's home and you think about the history that took place in the home, and each room has its own special decor.
We're standing in the room that was Mr. Bass's bedroom, that will become the president of the university, Sister Elisa's office, when the building is complete. Heidi, can you explain what the guys are doing?
Sure. The walls have been removed of their previous covering. It's deteriorated because of the age of the building. Right now we are putting this sample on, applying the different colors. The goal of the project is to retain as much of the original artwork that is here. So the flowers are conserved.
It started with Chuck Knox coming in, doing the restoration or the actual investigation of paint services and getting us down to basic colors for each of the rooms. And in the process, we found stencils and pieces of art that we didn't know existed because it had been painted over, etc.
Look at the hallway down here now, and we've got these cream light colored walls all over, and then we've got these dark brackets up top up there. And what we found out by digging down, getting original colors, is these brackets are much lighter than that right now, kind of an ivory color with a glaze over the top of it. And then we know that our hallway is going to be that dark green with our big 36-inch stencil over the top.
That by far was, out of all my years of stenciling, probably the hardest stencil I had to do. Not only was it just mathematically difficult, it was also difficult because it was a base coat and then another paint, eggshell paint over that, followed by two glazes, and then followed by a fourth paint. So between the two flats, the two glazes, try not to have any overlap, try not to have anything get out of place with going around all the corbels, all the inside corners, outside corners, having it mirror each other going down the hallway. That it definitely had me pull my hair out.
This historical masterpiece, nestled amongst the 108-acre complex of the University of St. Francis, would not have been possible without the exquisite taste of one of Fort Wayne's most influential entrepreneurs, John H. Bass. His country estate, known as Brookside, is where the spirit of the Bass and Leslie families endures. And this esteemed university has made the commitment to protect and nurture this spirit. The legend begins in the hills of Salem, Kentucky, where John Henry was born in 1835 to Sion and Jane Dodd Bass. There were 3 siblings, all unique in their own way. And as most siblings do, they leave the nest. But John wasn't the first one to venture out to greatness.
It's easy to think of John Bass as a rags to riches story, that kind of like Horatio Alger, the poor man comes to Fort Wayne and makes it rich. But actually the Bass family was of middle-class stock. They came from Salem, Kentucky, and the father, whose name was Sion Bass, had a large farm and was a merchant, and the family was solidly middle class. The eldest son was Sion St. Clair Bass, and he came to Fort Wayne first in 1848. And he became involved in the foundry business and founded a company called the Jones Bass Company. And it was a prosperous company, and it got going into the 1850s. And then he sent for his younger brother, John Henry, in 1852.
With the success established by Scion Bass, his parents could see that Fort Wayne presented unlimited opportunities for their children. So 16-year-old John Henry, by means of stagecoach and canal boat, ventured forth. Little did Fort Wayne know how much Scion and John Henry Bass would shape their future. Soon after John Henry arrived, he found work as a grocery store clerk. Being an ambitious budding entrepreneur, he studied accounting in the evening. Well, his studies paid off. By 1853, John Bass was hired by successful contractors Samuel and William Edsel, and he worked for his brother Scion's company from 1854 to 1857.
Edsel brothers, William and Samuel, and they had a railroad line that they had run up to the Wabash River. And then he goes to work as an accountant for his brother Scion. And Scion, meanwhile, is the head of the family and is making good money. And he sells his company to the Pittsburgh, Fort Wayne, Chicago Railroad. And this is towards the end of the 1850s. And John, meanwhile, is still looking to establish himself. And he sees limited possibilities of making big money in Fort Wayne. But there was a lot of opportunity in the West at that time. A lot of new land was opening up, and it was inexpensive. Iowa, the Dakotas. And he went out there in 1857 with some money that he'd saved and started buying cheap government land and bought a substantial amount of it. And by the time he returned to Fort Wayne, he had tripled his investment, and he had something like $50,000 worth of U.S. bought land, which is a substantial amount of money by modern standards. And so then he was poised to really get into the Fort Wayne business world.
After 2 years of successful real estate dealings, he returned to Fort Wayne with enough capital to purchase a canal line, which was in operation until the railroads came along, and he embarked upon the industry that would come to bear his name and impact the nation. In 1859, John H. Bass and Edward L. Force created Bass and Force, a foundry and machine shop. Bass and Force had $20,000 on their books within the first year of production. A year later, Bass and Force took on a new partner, Judge Samuel Hanna. This arrangement grew the company for a few years until Judge Hanna sold his interest to John H. in 1863, giving John sole ownership of the Fort Wayne Machine Works, located on Superior Street. This further ingrained John H. Bass in the business world as an ironworks icon.
Sam Hanna was the primary business entrepreneur of early Fort Wayne, and John was of the next generation. And Sam Hanna was involved in almost every kind of mercantile activity at that time. And so he gave John some venture capital to continue the Fort Wayne Machine Works. And so during the Civil War, they started manufacturing axles and wheels for rail cars. And as the rails were expanding, they needed to transport troops, they needed to build rail cars, so it was the perfect time to be in business. And John made the most of it.
Meanwhile, in 1861, the Civil War is raging. Scion Bass, who felt a calling for his country, resigned his business responsibilities in Fort Wayne to help organize the 30th Indiana Volunteer Infantry. As colonel of that regiment, he led his command in one of the charges on the second day of the Battle of Shiloh. He, along with many other brave soldiers, gave up their lives that day. The Bass family suffered a great loss.
The Civil War was a period of economic boom in Fort Wayne and the North generally. Bass managed to get to the point where he had a virtual monopoly. He advertised himself as the largest car wheel works in the world. And the thing that's generally forgotten nowadays is that the Fort Wayne operation was the tip of the iceberg of an industrial empire.
1869, he purchases something called the St. Louis Wheel Company. And this was a major manufacturing plant for wheels. And he goes down to Alabama and starts buying up mines for iron mines, and has like 20,000 acres of land, I think, in Alabama. And then he buys land in Tennessee. And so he starts diversifying. And then in 1873, there was a Great Depression in America, and for many people that was discouraging. But Bass saw a a foundry come available for sale in Chicago, and he buys it, sort of to the surprise of people who say you shouldn't be doing that. And, but he saw the wisdom of doing that, and it greatly increased his output. So by the 1870s, they basically cornered the market on axles and wheels for rail cars, and they were making them all across the country, and he became very wealthy because of it.
By 1898, John H. incorporated the company as the Bass Foundry and Machine Works with a capital of $1.5 million, which was later increased to $2 million. The complex stretched along 20 acres next to the Pennsylvania Railroad on South Hannah Street. The foundry created jobs for thousands over the years, which naturally led to the significant growth of the Fort Wayne community. In the meantime, another empire of sorts was developing in Germany. The Sisters of St. Francis of Perpetual Adoration. This order of nuns will become the means by which the Bass family legacy lives on.
We started in Oppede, Germany, Westphalia area, in 1863. Mother Maria Theresia Bonsel was the foundress. She began a community that really worked with home nursing and care of orphan children, and in the Franciscan tradition. She wanted a Franciscan rule. In 1875, we sent our first 6 sisters to the United States, because at that time in Germany there was the period of the Kulturkampf with Chancellor Bismarck, who forbade any religious communities to expand and gain members and open new ministries. So instead of dying, we were invited by Bishop Dwenger to come to the United States. Lafayette, Indiana was in the Diocese of Fort Wayne, and so our sisters came to Lafayette.
Within the first year that the sisters arrived, they started a small hospital, St. Elizabeth. The original building is still standing.
That complex grew to incorporate a hospital and our headquarters of our community, our mother house, and they had a high school, and they had a school of nursing, and they had a college, St. Francis College, which we use our founding date as 1890, started as a training school for sisters for education.
The college at the time was the St. Francis Normal School, a 2-year teacher training institution. As the sisters were building their religious community in Germany, John Henry Bass acquired his most valued asset, his wife, Laura Holton Lightfoot from Kentucky. They were married in 1865.
He met her when she was 18 and he was 30. And the family story is he was at a ball down in Kentucky and saw her and said, "I'm going to marry that girl."
She got his attention at least, and she agreed to kind of court him. And he promised her if she married him, he'd build her a castle. This is the castle, if you will.
John and Laura Bass started their married life living in a townhouse at the corner of Westbury and Fairfield Avenue. They had 2 children. Laura Grace was born in 1872 and John Henry in 1880. With his growing family and success came the start of the construction of Brookside in 1887. What started as a summer vacation home became a grand architectural landmark on a 300-acre tract of land. It took 4 years to complete.
In 1887, he decided he would like to have a little country getaway, and so he built a frame house out here. The origin of the name Brookside is simply that the 300-acre tract of land that John Bass bought in 1887 had a stream running through it, and he wanted to create a nice idyllic landscape for his country retreat, so he dammed it and he created Mirror Lake, which still wraps around the house on 2 sides. And then in 1893, there was an item in the paper that indicated that he was having that house clad in sandstone.
I mean, the sandstone is unbelievable on how they wrestled those, all the machinery we have today, and the lifts and the cranes and the laws and everything. I mean, you got to think back. There was nothing. There was horse-drawn block and tackle.
The style of Brookside is an outstanding example of Richardsonian Romanesque architecture. Some characteristics are sculpted shapes and the use of heavy masonry walls, rounded, square, or polygonal-shaped towers with conical roofs. The architectural firm of Wing and Mahurin was commissioned for this project because of their reputation of mastering this Romanesque style. Many courthouses in Indiana and Fort Wayne City Hall were among samples in their portfolio. The Bass Mansion Commission was one of their finest works.
The architectural elements, both on the interior and the exterior, have a lot to do with why it is significant for architecture. Details like the carved stonework on the fireplace, the use of stained glass, and then all of the interior decorative items as well, the murals, the carvings, the floors with the inlaid wood designs. All of it has a bearing on what makes the building architecturally significant.
The sculptural program on the outside of Brookside is very much typical of the Richardsonian Romanesque. You know, it's just the case that the historical models that the style is based on are, by and large, cathedrals. And so you have the guardian spirits along the roofline, and you have a lot of iconography that derives from religious motifs, plant forms, even a little bit of Islamic influence.
The library on the first floor of the Bass Mansion was originally designed so that on a winter day, the south sun would come in through the windows, giving you a warm place to sit, read a good book, maybe watch the snow outside. But buildings have to work for what the user needs them to do. And in this case, the Bass Mansion desperately needed access to the second and third floors, so there was need to put an elevator in. The way the architects did that in this building is delightful. They've retained the window openings, and we now have this wonderful way of telling the story of the Bass Mansion, and then it comes into where the new elevator is. By doing that, they actually retained the original fabric.
Hey, now we're starting to get more. Right here, I'm showing 3 foot to the center of the column right there.
108 years ago, they just excavated down until they found the clay, and then they would lay a piece of limestone down, approximately 2 feet wide, and then they would lay off of that. That was their footing. Well, today's codes, obviously, we're 3 foot below now, or right around 3 foot to 42 inches below frost line. So we had to shore all that up and cut holes in the walls, which were approximately anywhere from one area was 3 foot thick, another area was 25 inches thick, and one area through a corner down there, through an overbuild, was 5 foot thick. And once they removed all those, and then we brought a crane in and we'd stick our beams in to shore the house, and then we could finish excavating on the outside underneath the beams, all the way down. Another couple tracks loads of dirt were removed just so we could pour our foundation for the elevator itself. And then every floor on the way up for cutting penetrations, or we'd run into the flooring itself is 15 inches thick.
Right now we're pre-drilling some holes that are going through a 24-inch thick wall, and what's going to happen is from the outside we're going to run a wire that has diamond beads on it. It's going to come through the holes, it's going to go down, and it's going to come through the bottom hole, and then it's going to go back outside onto a pulley system, and that wire is going to spin around and cut that section of wall.
The family spent weekends away from the city in their small farmhouse on the property where Brookside was being built. The farm was of a grand scale, which was expected of John Bass. He raised the typical chickens and turkeys. His barns were filled with prize-winning cattle and fine riding horses. And the Fort Wayne area benefited from the Brookside Dairy.
We had Brookside Dairy is what it was called. And when the flood of Fort Wayne occurred, the Clydesdale horses were the only thing to get milk to the people in Fort Wayne. They were the only thing that could get through the river.
When the mansion was complete, this farmhouse became the farm manager's residence.
My grandfather actually worked at the farm. He had come from England and been a cowboy out west, and Mr. Bass hired him because he was knowledgeable about the Galloway cattle that Mr. Bass liked to raise. So my mother grew up in the farmhouse across the road. She and my future mother-in-law were friends going through their teenage years. In fact, my mother-in-law always hoped that my mother would marry one of her brothers, but she didn't. But I knew my husband, who is one of John Bass's great-grandsons. We knew each other as babies because our mothers were friends. So I used to come and play in this house when I was very small.
This is the library, right? This is the library. There was a huge library table that ran from about here over to here. It was huge. And it had a cloth, maybe it was set over further, but it had a cloth draped over the top. And kids could hide under really well. I spent a good fraction of my childhood up until I was about 9 or 10 years old when my grandfather died, visiting and playing in the house with cousins, some of whom were resident at the time.
At the turn of the century, John H. Bass was enjoying his Brookside and slowing down a bit in his business ventures. This was a bittersweet time as his promising young son, John Jr., became seriously ill. John Henry, being financially able, hired local physician Dr. Gaylord Leslie to care for his son. It was during this time that Laura Grace Bass and Dr. Leslie became acquainted and began their courtship. Sadly, the very young John Bass Jr. died on August 7, 1901. 2 years later, Laura Grace and Dr. Gaylord were married.
He ended up being a great assistant to the family because of his not only medical knowledge but his business knowledge, and he was able to step up and help with the business. And by this time, John Henry Bass had gotten involved in a variety of ventures. He was on the boards of a variety of banks in town. He continued to have a stake in the railroad, the street railroad company, and Gaylord Leslie really helped manage the company.
As the family was grieving the loss of their son and celebrating the engagement of their daughter to Dr. Leslie, tragedy struck again. On February 11, 1902, a steam boiler exploded in the basement, causing a fire that virtually destroyed Brookside. It was said that the total loss was $150,000, of which $110,000 was covered by insurance. Mr. Bass commissioned Wing and Mahurin again to rebuild his Brookside. This time, it was designed to be completely fireproof.
The original budget was said to be $5,000. The house actually cost $15,000. Now that house burned down a couple of years later and was replaced by this one on the same foundations, although the major change being that in order to avoid future fires, this house is entirely built out of masonry and concrete, including the floors. And this house, this final version of the house cost about $82,000. So there was a significant increase in cost between the first and the second version of the house.
The interior design of Brookside was said to be influenced by the family's travels. Decorators from Marshall Field and the Mandel brothers of Chicago, the most sought-after decorators of the time, furnished the rooms in elaborate style. Many architectural and artistic styles were used throughout the home: English Tudor, Italian, French, and Byzantine, to name a few.
Mrs. Bass has a number of periods represented in the building, from room to room to room, periods of art. And I think it will be a great example for people to come and look and what does Moorish design look like in comparison to the Napoleonic period or some other period, or the Romanesque period. I mean, we have a living example of architecture on our campus that we can use as an educational resource.
Grace Leslie Dickerson mentions that supposedly the Basses had visited Kensington Palace in London, and they'd seen a hunt scene mural, and they decided they had to have a hunt scene mural in their dining room. Well, the one in Kensington's a boar hunt. They decided they didn't want a boar hunt, so they made it a stag hunt.
The dining room, the Holzschlag murals. Now, Edwin Holzschlag was a German who thought the only thing I can find that he painted big time was in the Jefferson Building of the Library of Congress. So he was with that huge group of muralists that painted at the Jefferson Building of the Library of Congress. So So he came from there to here. He painted the dining room. He is said to be painting the rotunda mural up in the on the third floor in the ballroom up there. And he is also to have painted the murals in Mr. Bass's den that we were looking at with the red walls. And so that's a very important set of decoration in there just because of the artist who did it.
We are doing conservation cleaning on this mural and figure out what will take the dirt off, not the paint. So that was a whole process in itself. It's previously been touched up after the original, and so after I'm done cleaning it, basically try to get some consistency with the color, do a little touch-up work on it. It was originally a silver leaf mural.
We had to abandon the 4 big windows in the library for the new elevator shaft. Well, when those were windows, there was this massive radiator that sat in front of the windows. And in the ground, there was this 2x2 grate that went to the basement. We removed the radiator because we didn't need it anymore because the windows weren't on an outside wall. And then the guy that did the floors said, well, I can take that 2x2 grate out of the floor, you'll never know it was there. I said, well, I'd like to see that. Ralph Baskey and I all but dared him, okay, let's see it. And I don't think anyone will be able to tell that was there.
All this will be all refinished, all this wood. You can see certain areas down by the registers where we have actually repaired some of the wood and put a sealer on there so it won't get damaged anymore during construction. But some of these areas we have to actually repiece in the same exact way we're doing the mosaics, and all back to original. And then all this will be all stripped, sanded, and resealed back to all its original beauty.
The Packard Piano Company built the staircase, the spiral staircase that's in the foyer area. And for people to understand how artisans were brought in to do that, you wouldn't think of piano company building a staircase, but that's what happened here.
With the reconstructed Brookside complete, this 24,000 square foot home quickly filled up with Dr. Gaylord Leslie and his wife Laura Grace, their 5 children, John and Laura Bass, and John's parents, Sion and Jane Bass.
When John H. and Laura were alive over in the original master bedroom, this must have been where my grandmother and my grandfather shared a room together. Because this of the bedrooms, this is the largest and most ornate after the master bedroom, and if you really do a measurement on the floor area, this is actually bigger than the major part of the master, or the bedroom part of the master bedroom over there. And it has, I think, the best view to the lake and all the good parts.
Our grandfather was the 3rd eldest child. Mary's first, Linda's second. John came 3rd. Then came Grace, and then came Gaylord. By then, that was 3 generations still living in the family. Mr. Bass's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bass, their daughter, their grandchildren.
I remember Mary always being a tremendous flirt everywhere we went. And she would say things to the gentlemen that we would come across that I could only describe as gushing over them.
Mary was the fun one. Linda was very serious.
Most of the time.
Most of the time. She did have a sense of humor, but you had to really pay attention.
Grace always having this little bit of racy side to her character, where she liked being an artist. She was a little more bohemian. She liked fast cars, She, they always had a little bit of a daring edge, or a little bit of something that I admired.
My mother-in-law had gone to art school and at the Chicago Art Institute before she was married, and she actually used the solarium area at the end of the dining room was her art studio, and she painted a lot in there.
One of my favorite rooms in the whole building is actually one of the ones that's simple and plain compared to the others, but that's deceptive. This was a room that was originally a solarium, a place for plants to grow in the wintertime, a place to bring the sunshine in. But even in this very simple room, we've got wonderful tin ceilings, All of the windows are curved, and the walls themselves are curved, and the door that actually brings you into the room is itself a curved door. The details, again, for a very simple space, a utilitarian space, are extraordinary and part of what makes the architecture so significant in this building.
Grace Leslie would have a dinner party for the blind and disabled and pull out the best crystal, the best linens, the best, the china, the bone china, everything, the silver, everything, as if she would have a dinner party for anyone else, because they were our honored guests.
We always ate in the dining room. My mother tells the story of my grandfather Bass. My grandfather Bass loved bacon. Being a good Southern gentleman, he never came to the dinner table without his plate of bacon. Now, today that would be a no-no. And here's a man who lived to 87 years old with his plate of bacon. But the grandchildren would come around and, "Grandpa, can I have a piece of bacon?" Why, of course. And they would always give the children a piece of bacon.
The chairs in the dining room that are around the table are the original chairs from the dining room, and we have photographs that you can even, see that they are exactly the same. My goal is for when people come in and they walk through the house in tours or just, enjoy a room, that they see a piece or two or a piece of artwork that would be period or even original to the house.
Rooms were basically classified as either having artwork in them that needed to be restored, or areas in the building that were just turned over to general painters. And so once those decisions were made, then it came down to working with both entities, using the information that Chuck had gleaned to identify the actual colors of the original paint swatches for each of the rooms. All the photographs that we have are black and white. So it was, a real investigation of the surfaces that led us to understand the colors.
On top of this drawing, I'll go over with this wheel. It sort of looks like a spur from a cowboy boot, and it makes lots of little holes. Then I place that in the position where it's to be on the ceiling and rub it with a pounce pad, which is basically filled with charcoal. That leaves all of the dots behind. You paint within the dots. It gives you your whole design on the ceiling. And all of the ceiling is done from basically this little corner. It's a flip-flop pattern.
What's been your most difficult part of the project?
It would have to be making the molds.
All the new molds you made for the different cornices and the ones were damaged by
the
water
cornice
damage.
molds and making the molds for the brackets. First, you want to spray this with PAM or skillet spray so it doesn't stick, and then it takes several coats of paint where you paint the rubber on, and you have to let it dry thoroughly. It takes about 8 coats, and then you peel that off, and you have to make a little form box to set that in so it fits perfectly, and then you pour it full of plaster and let it set up, and you have your mold. It'll set up in the mold in about a half hour. You can take it out, but with that thick of plaster, it takes it several days to dry, to cure out. You just have to sand it down, fine tune it, and then stick it onto the wall with molding plaster.
Most of the rooms in Brookside are adorned with a fireplace, but not just any ordinary fireplace. There are 13 in all, each inspiring the decor of the room. Pink marble, iridescent mosaic tiles, South African onyx, African marble, and Venetian tile are just a small sampling.
This one's going to be a fun one. We're going to have to clean all this marble, scrub it down by hand with marble cleaners, and then we have, after we get this all done and cleaned, we've already replaced tiles on here, which I'll take this off because this is where we replaced some of them already. Believe it or not, this whole corner here has been rebuilt.
He's cut those pieces individually out of other tile that he brought on site. We cut each individual little piece and laid them in. Quite time consuming.
The fireplaces were really important in our restoration of this project because almost all of the colors that we found that were in the base paint were reflected in the fireplace at some place or another. And so, you know, understanding how the design mind works is an incredible lesson and gift.
The fireplace in Bass's office looks right off of a cover of a Jimi Hendrix album. If you take just small pieces of it. And we had a really hard time matching that quality and sheen of a tile. So in some cases, if you visit the mansion, you'll see all these banding of colors and texture and tones. In some cases, you'll notice that we had to take out the entire band, so you couldn't catch with the human eye individual tiles that we replaced.
In the early 20th century, having electric light fixtures in a home was an extravagance only enjoyed by a few. This was a time when a bare light bulb was a status symbol.
This is the billiard light. See, there's a ring of lights up here. So we're basically gonna remove that ring, and that'll just go in storage. If they ever want to put it back to its original configuration, then everything's there. And that's the other thing when you're working on things like this. You want to try not, if somebody wants to change something, you want to try to do it in such a way that if they want to take it back to its original state, that they can do that you haven't destroyed or compromised the piece to the extent that it can never be taken back to what it was originally meant to be.
Had his own power plant from the beginning, so these light fixtures are purely electric fixtures. They're not combination gas electric the way people would have had in Fort Wayne. See, originally the light plants ran arc lights for street lighting, and people liked the quality of the electric light better than the gas light, but the power was only on the hours of the day the street lights were on. So they had to have combination gas electric fixtures.
The Back 40, at that time, it was the Fairway Restaurant in 1950. And it operated there for 25 years, and then it moved to this location in 1975. This was 1951. A local antique dealer drove by in his truck, showed me where he had just picked up this chandelier and wanted to know if I was interested in buying it. It was a beautiful thing, and I had a place for it, so I bought it.
So then it was later that I realized the Azars owned the Back 40 Junction restaurant. So I had George come out a couple times and invited him, first of all, to see the house, you know, so he could see what we had in mind here. And then second time, again, to show him where we would like to put the new fixture, if they would contribute it to the university. And they did. So George was gracious. All he was asking in return was that we give scholarships to the value of the chandelier that now hangs in the foyer. So we have yet to figure out the total value. It's probably very expensive.
The Back 40 restaurant in Decatur, it was housed there for years, and they had donated the light back, and we went down and took it out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, when we got there, I think the first thing somebody told me that the price on it was irreplaceable. I mean, it's unreplaceable, so that kind of shook us up a little bit, but I think it took us 4 of us to take it down, you included.
Yep.
So, and then once I got it down, I looked at it for a while we were taking it down. Every time I looked at it, I seen something really unique with that light fixture.
It is something special and a beautiful chandelier, and I would say one of a kind. It's a glad and sad day, but I think it was a good idea to return the chandelier to its original home.
This one is going to be really interesting to work on because I have to be able to, all the electrical is right here, okay? The wires run up through here, through his arm, out his back, and into this area here, okay? So I have to have access to this area. So because of its size and weight, you know, I can't just lay it down on the floor and start pulling parts off.
Not only did it have, 100 years of dirt and grime and whatever, but being in a restaurant, you can imagine what it looked like. And then when we actually saw it starting to come to life and getting down to the basics of the surfaces of the original fixture, it was simply amazing.
I think out of this whole job, that light fixture. I mean, of course, all the woodwork and all the glass, but that light fixture there is probably that'll stick in my mind. That was unique, and it was an awesome light fixture.
Along with the coveted electric lights and gas fireplaces, another luxury of the time was steam heat. Many rooms in Brookside have exposed steam pipes as a testament to this lavish comfort.
At that time, that was as neat of something to show off to friends as possible. And the guy had lights in every room, gas fireplaces, and radiators in every, had steam heating in every room. I mean, why would you hide that? That's definitely something you would brag about at a party. So I think you just have to understand not only the functionality of the room, but the time it's occurring in. The biggest challenge was getting piping to all the individual rooms because they all have their own cooling units. So what we had to do last summer, one of the first things we did is go on site and what we call trench the walls. We came in with a trencher and literally cut channels everywhere. I mean, every room had some sort of trenching in it so that we could bury the piping and repair the walls and plaster over them.
It's not like today's construction when you have a cavity, you have a stud-built wall and there's a cavity where you can fish lines. You could not fish lines anywhere in this house. Everything is block, concrete, tile, and plaster.
The cooling system that we installed here, we're cooling that system with water out of the lake, or well water from a well down by the lake. Can you talk a little bit about how we got that from the well down at the lake up to the building here?
Yeah, in the scope of work, we had to directional bore 2 3-inch lines from the well and the lake up to the building, and then core drill through a 2.5-foot wall to get them into the building. The well water lines are to cool the condensers for the cooling system. Instead of the condensers sitting outside and looking big and ugly, they're sitting in the basement and they're cooled by water instead of air.
I think we all learned a lot in how to work with specialized consultants that this kind of project requires, doing paint analysis and restoration of woodwork and floors and decorative painting and so on. It's a project that requires a whole different set of craftsmen to do it correctly. We were very careful about who we invited to give us prices on various aspects of the work. We looked carefully at qualifications. Kind of the rule of thumb that I kept in mind as we were doing this was that if we do our job really well, you'll never know we were here. That what we've inserted into the building will be done in such a way that it won't intrude on the history of the building. Now, obviously there are exceptions. We have to have things like fire alarms and call boxes and things like that the code is going to require, and we try to work with those in a sensitive way. And when you look at the detail and the fantastic ornamentation of the building, some of those things really tend to kind of blend away, and very little becomes intrusive in the end. So again, it's our hope that when we're done, when the public comes in and sees the finished product, there'll be very little evidence that we were ever here. Yet the building will have air conditioning that it never had, and it will have the data systems and all the things that will allow the university to use it as a modern building.
We are accustomed to seeing the fruits of our ideas. And 3 months ago, you could see everything we did. The trenching in the walls, the piping, the mechanical systems. As of this last week, you probably can see a couple spots here and there, but for the most part, it's all concealed. There's a lot of pride, I think, on site by the guys that did that. I know there is. but it is a little deflating to know that our primary goal was to make it look like we never were here.
Beyond foundries, machine shops, and mines, John H. Bass, being the savvy entrepreneur, was well diversified. To list a few other interests, he was one of the organizers of the Packard Piano Company. He fulfilled the mass transportation needs of the city with the first horse-drawn trolley system. For more than 40 years, John H. served on the boards of Old National and Hamilton Banks. He was honored as a 33rd degree Mason and was a lifelong member of the First Presbyterian Church. Simply, a well-respected businessman. John H. Bass died in 1922 after a long illness. His wife Laura most appropriately honors him in her words. John H. Bass won success and fortune for himself, but he brought great good to his city. His years were well spent.
That at the time he died in 1922, the newspapers speculated that his fortune was somewhere between $5 and $6 million. And if you convert that into modern dollars, that's, if you use 6 million as the figure, that's something like $10.6 billion now.
This left his business affairs to Dr. Leslie and the newly widowed Laura Holton Bass. The century was changing dramatically. The Depression era of the 30s washed over the country, and the railroad companies were losing ground to the motor freight industry, causing the Bass Foundry to lose its hold in the industry. Out of the desire for the employees to keep their jobs, Mrs. Bass tried desperately to keep the payroll going. She couldn't bear losing the business that her husband spent a lifetime building. But she succumbed to pneumonia in 1935. Dr. Leslie was left with no choice. In 1941, the Bass Foundry and Machine Works was no more. He died just 2 years later.
By the early 1940s, Dr. Leslie had passed away, and he was the last person who really had a handle on continuing to being able to continue to manage the affairs of the whole Bass empire, which by that time was pretty much in tatters.
It's the 1940s, wartime, and the Sisters of St. Francis must find a new home. The college evolved in 1939 from the St. Francis Normal School, a 2-year teacher training institution, into St. Francis College, a 4-year college granting bachelor's degrees. Up to this time, sisters had been the only students attending the normal school. After the expansion, the decision was made to admit laywomen into the college.
The property in Lafayette where the sisters first came eventually expanded to a full city block. And within that block, there was the offices, the headquarters of the order, a hospital, the college, a girls' high school, and it was just packed. And the sisters, of course, were trying to get accreditation for the college, and they were told they could not have accreditation until the college had its own campus. And so, and the year before, the Mother House moved out to relieve the congestion.
At the same time, the Bass's granddaughter, Grace Bass Leslie, made the decision to sell Brookside. She was in ill health, city taxes were high, and World War II was making it impossible to find household help. Brookside was just too much to manage alone. With both the Mother House and the college in need of a new home, Bishop John Francis Knoll started to look for properties. First, the Mother House was moved to the Carlisle Estate near Mishawaka, Indiana in 1943. Then, in 1944, the bishop, along with the dean of St. Francis College, had heard about the Bass Mansion property. The purchase of the 65 acres of land, along with the 36-room mansion, was made. The first van arrived at the mansion on August 25, 1944. The opening of the fall quarter was September 16th, with an enrollment of 178. This was the initiation of the current-day University of St. Francis.
We closed the deal in June of 1944 for $60,000, which is a deal. But the Bass family didn't leave right away. The sisters came in August, but were not able to get entrance into the building because the Bass family was still living here, and they had a sale of their items that went on till about August 15th, I think.
Some of the neighbors were very relieved, I have heard, because there was some talk about turning it into a home for delinquent boys. And of course, the neighbors and all the people around there weren't crazy about that. So I think the general neighborhood was happy when it was decided, the sisters decided to buy it.
Sister Ida and Sister Constance and I, the three, and Sister Maxine, the four of us, came on the train from Lafayette, Indiana. We had to first load up the truck that was going to bring all of our belongings here.
Some of the neighbors in the neighborhoods, only sisters would try to move a college in wartime. You can imagine moving a library, moving out labs with test tubes and all of that. There were really no able-bodied men to be had, you know, so it was quite an ordeal moving the college.
We had rags and soap and all those things, so we had to start cleaning in the basement first and work up. But that only gave us 2 weeks before school opened.
The sisters lived in this building. It was the convent, it was classrooms, it was the chapel, it was the administrative offices, it was the library. It was everything. I've heard tales from some of the older sisters, whom are all deceased now, about how difficult it was. And they were poor, they didn't have a lot of money. Stories about getting food from the mother house, chickens and vegetables and potatoes and things to feed themselves and the students.
This is the room where we first set up the library on both sides. And Sister Maxine and I got the first experience in setting up a library.
The chapel was there, the kitchen, the cafeteria, a sister ran the kitchen. The ballroom on the 3rd floor, that was the music department.
Oh, well, we had dances for the students upstairs in the ballroom, but we stayed up too late that first time for Halloween. Couldn't go up there anymore for the dances because it was curfew. We had a curfew.
It was a very good education. I think I find almost everyone of that generation is saying, as small as we were, as limited as the facilities were, we received an excellent education here. And we're able to go out and compete well on the job market with the people from larger universities.
Our great Aunt Grace, Les's mother, went to school here and quite proud of it. She'd been taught here for a while. And her diploma, is very proud of graduating from the school she was raised in.
It's a place that's very dear to my heart because not only did I go there as a layperson, but I found my vocation there and I came back there as a sister, never dreaming that I would teach there someday, or that I would be president there. So I always said my heart is nailed to a tree there somewhere.
When we see our humble beginning, you know, and to see now how it has improved and grown, it just makes my heart feel good inside. It just makes me real happy inside to know that all of this has come about.
I think one of the really wonderful things is to be able to come back and get a really intimate snapshot of what life was like at that time. And yes, they were a wealthy family, so it's one side of the societal picture. And yet, it really does paint a portrait of what it was like to live in that time, you know, what it was like to, as my father said, be a family in that particular time, and it's sort of the inner workings of what life was like.
There's an ownership still there that we've sort of shepherded or taken care of their house, and I'd like to think that they feel like it's theirs too.
I think it's everybody has the same sentiments. It's going to be a showpiece for all of us. It's something we can all say we're proud to work on when it's done. Mm-hmm. It's just a unique building.
Exactly.
It's a phenomenal opportunity to experience the richness of art, the richness of history, and the respect for artisans.
Some of the woodworking guys, the carpenters, the tile work, the plaster, you don't get that chance on every project for those specific trades to really show what you're made of. And it was nice to see guys that not only saw that as an opportunity for them, but took pride in the fact that they were a part of this.
The house symbolizes all of what Mr. Bass meant and did for the city of Fort Wayne. And I'd like to bring that story back a little bit more so that people really realize that.
They've walked through the process in exactly the right way. They've done all of their homework. They've worked with consultants. They've worked with the best architects, the best conservators, and they've really done what a building of this grandeur needs in terms of making it work for the next 100 years.
Brookside, the essence of the Gilded Age, is a permanent part of Indiana history with its addition to the National Register of Historic Places in 1982. An architectural masterpiece and testament to an industrial icon that Fort Wayne holds in the highest esteem. With the careful preservation and tender care of the University of St. Francis, the spirit of the Bass and Leslie families will live on, just as John and Laura had intended.
Add some drama.
Yeah, we need some drama. Yeah, I was chewing him out earlier. We were on a non-talking basis just a few minutes ago.
This is a bad time.
The preceding program on PBS Fort Wayne was made possible in part by
the Steel Dynamics Foundation, supporting a wide variety of causes, including children and family services, economic development, and education in business and technology fields. The Steel Dynamics Foundation, strengthening the communities where our employees live and work.
Funding also provided through generous contributions from these businesses and foundations, and from viewers like you. Thank you.